campaign, or OCEC. We are speaking today from the traditional territories of the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinabeg, the Chippewa, the Wendat, and the Haudenosaunee. We acknowledge our valuable partner at Registered Nurses Association of Ontario. We have clearly entered an era of climate emergency, which the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change has called a code red for humanity. The OCEC is a rapidly growing non-partisan campaign currently comprised of nearly 150 signatory groups from across Ontario and representing approximately 500,000 people from diverse sectors and walks of life. This campaign empowers every Ontarian to take real action to change our course. OCEC promotes the critical importance of strong climate policy, holding all candidates and the next government accountable to an extensively scoped climate action plan. À ce moment critique, chacune est invitée à ajouter sa voix à ce mouvement. On doit tenir le gouvernement responsable d'assurer notre avenir collectif. It is crucial that we elect a government on June 2nd that is committed to strong climate action, a government that understands the many specific actions that must be taken together to bring emissions down urgently. The OCEC enables real hope through powerful democratic tools for all. Our speakers today will expand on the climate action plan essential to preserving our future. Our first speaker will be Lana Goldberg, Ontario Climate Program Manager at Environmental Defence. She will be followed by Andre Forsyth of the School for Climate and Executive Director at Canadian Climate Challenge. Our next speaker will be Dr. Samantha Green, Family Physician and Board Member at Canadian Association of Physicians for the Environment. Our last speaker is Dina Ladd, Executive Director at Workers' Action Centre. Thanks very much, and we'll pass it on to Lana.
Thanks, Melly. So Ontario was successfully decreasing emissions from 2005 to 2017 as a result of its coal phase-out. But emissions started to rise again in 2018 when the new government took office. The pandemic caused a dip in pollution levels, but emissions are expected to rebound. And Ontario is not on track to meet its weak target of cutting emissions by 30% by 2030. And even if it was, this would still not be enough for Ontario to do its fair share to limit planetary warming to 1.5 Celsius, which would require a 60% reduction by 2030. A government could meet this target if it was serious about climate change and took the required measures. Instead of increasing the use of gas plants to generate electricity, the province needs to phase out gas-fired electricity and invest in renewable energy. It needs to bring back efficiency programs, adopt a net zero building code, incentivize retrofits, and phase out gas heating systems. It must ensure that high-emitting industries pay for their pollution while encouraging them to decrease emissions by strengthening the emissions performance standards. It has to cancel plans to build new mega highways like Highway 413, which would put more cars on the road, increase emissions, and promote car-dependent sprawl. Instead, the government must invest in affordable and accessible zero-emissions public transit and build complete, walkable, cycle-friendly communities where people can access the things they need without having to own a car. For those who want to own cars, the province needs to bring back incentives to purchase electric vehicles and implement a zero-emissions vehicle mandate. To address climate change and its impacts, the province must also protect natural carbon sinks, restore natural ecosystem functions, and preserve biodiversity. A good first step would be to restore the full mandate and independence of conservation authorities. All of these measures are entirely possible if we have a government that is committed to climate action. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. As you heard, my name is Andre Forsyth, and I'm the lead at the School for Climate. climate arts nonprofit, as well as a signatory to the Ontario Climate Emergency Campaign. So thank you, Millie, for the introduction and for having me here today. I actually will share with you, I ended up crying this morning in preparation for being here today. I'm not sure if that's because I was up at 5 a.m. I'm not sure if it's because I left my contacts in last night, which is very painful in the morning, or because at that precise moment, I remember the first time I engaged with the topic of climate change, and it was in undergrad with my best friend as I attended a guest lecture by none other than David Suzuki, who you'll hear from later today. That was my first discussion in undergrad. I didn't grow up downtown. I grew up in Scarborough. I grew up in Markham. I grew up in North York. I grew up in Durham in the 905, in a mixture of privileged communities and underprivileged, in and out of communities of color. And I can assure you that learning about climate change, let alone climate injustice, came way too late in life. How can we take action if we are not aware of these solutions? And so part of the reason we're signing on today is because of the need for a public education campaign, as is outlined in the Ontario Climate Emergency Campaign. We know that campaign needs to be led by scientists. It needs to be led by trusted community leaders, sectoral, industry, religious, and it needs to be led by an independent office of the Environmental Commissioner that needs to be reinstated this election. We are part of a generation that is signing because we were born into these challenges of systemic barriers, of systemic climate injustice and social injustice. And though we don't want responsibility for living within them, we do have the responsibility of changing them. We have signed on to the Ontario Climate Emergency Campaign as a generation that is deciding whether or not to have children due to the climate emergency. And as that generation, we are trying to figure out the difference between voting the way that we've learned from our parents or voting for our children's future. And so we need to listen to the youth of today for the youth of tomorrow. These changes are systemic. They require bold vision, a bold narrative, and bold action as outlined in the Ontario Climate Emergency Campaign, better than any campaign you're going to hear from any of our political leaders. We cannot allow ourselves to be divided by the narratives of race against race, privileged versus non-privileged, and nation versus nation. So for those of us uncertain what to do with their privilege, for those of us afraid to lose it, for lucky to have it in the first place, look ahead at the path you are on. It's an unlivable world. Our biggest privilege right now is to have the solutions, the knowledge, and the financial capacity to implement those solutions. And our true privilege is to choose to do so. Thank you.
Thank you, Andre. My name is Dr. Samantha Green. I'm a family doctor in Toronto and board member with the Canadian Association of Physicians for the Environment. The World Health Organization has called climate change the biggest health threat of this century. This February's IPCC report confirms devastating effects on human health and health systems over the coming decades as we warm to 1.5 degrees and probably more. We are currently at 1.2 degrees of warming. Over the last year alone, more than 700 people died in British Columbia's heat dome event. Crops failed in droughts across the prairies, which has led to an increase in food prices. Flooding took out entire communities in BC and Newfoundland, causing injury and disrupting access to health services. And wildfires engulfed large parts of Western Canada and Northern Ontario, leading to an increase in lung and heart disease, poor diabetes control, and poor pregnancy outcomes. Furthermore, climate change is a driver for future pandemics. Climate change will lead to habitat disruption, leading to new proximities between humans and disease vectors, likely leading to zoonotic spillover events. And yet, there is reason for hope. The Lancet has called the climate crisis the biggest health opportunity of our time, and acting on climate change will lead to tremendous health benefits through reduced air pollution-related illness, increased active transportation, an increase in access to green space and nature, and an increase in plant-rich diets. Air pollution is estimated to cause 1 in 5 deaths worldwide, and meeting the targets of the Paris Climate Agreement would be expected to save over 1 million lives a year from air pollution alone by 2050. And as we redesign our society and economy to tackle the climate emergency, we will all lead healthier lives. The Ontario Climate Emergencies Campaign's Climate Action Plan will lead to these tremendous health benefits. And that's why so many health organizations have signed on, including the Registered Nurses Association of Ontario, the Canadian Federation of Medical Students, and the Canadian Association of Physicians for the Environment.
Hi, my name's Dina Ladd, and I'm the Executive Director of the Workers' Action Centre. We're pleased today to join in coalition with over 120 organizations in Ontario that have actually signed on to this amazing climate action plan that's being presented today. So let me be very blunt. There is a very clear plan and a way forward for the Ontario government to take action today on climate change. We're just 4 weeks away from an election in this province, and so we are paying attention. We're paying attention from all levels of our communities, and we're looking at what political parties are going to commit to move us away from this absolute crisis that we're in with our environment and climate. The issue of jobs is always a huge issue that emerges when we're talking about taking action, as immediately we think about workers in the fossil fuel sector who have good wages and a high standard of living. But as Naomi Klein has noted, turning low-paying, low-carbon jobs into high-paying jobs is itself a climate solution. What are already existing low-carbon jobs? These jobs are cleaning work, care work for children and seniors in their homes, as well as in hospitals and healthcare, support work for people with disabilities, education work, farm work, construction, recycling, delivery work, and so much more. Virtually everywhere, these jobs are underpaid, undervalued, and underprotected. Because of racism and sexism in the labor market, most workers in low-wage, low-carbon jobs are women, are racialized workers, migrants, and newcomers. So we need to ensure that decent work is an underpinning principle in the climate conversation, as this is also a matter of racial, gender, and migrant justice. Principle 3 of the Climate Action Plan today is to invest 2% of Ontario's GDP to advance the zero-emissions, decarbonized, renewable economy and create many thousands of decent, secure, sustainable jobs across multiple sectors. The Government of Ontario could focus on current low-carbon jobs that are low-waged and precarious and turn them into decent and secure jobs. We have to transform these current low-carbon jobs into decent, healthy, and well-paying jobs so we can actually move people from fossil fuel-connected jobs into other sectors. This doesn't have to be a downward spiral into bad jobs, but could be absolutely the opposite. Public sector jobs are also critical low-carbon jobs that provide vital services and addresses many needs in our communities. Instead of punishing public sector workers who are providing these services by passing bills such as Bill 124, which imposes a 1% freeze on wages, the Ontario government needs to be acting on creating a vibrant green economy. The challenge before any political party wanting our vote on June 2nd is how will they be transforming the current economy into a green, sustainable economy. Such an economy can only be built by lifting up all of those in precarious work and bringing them into the movement for climate justice. To take on the challenge of creating a sustainable, livable future that leaves no one behind will require a united movement capable of doing two things. One, transforming precarious low-carbon jobs into good ones, and uniting to preserve the skills and standards of those in the fossil fuel sector. We need everyone in our communities to elect a government that is serious about tackling gas emissions and fossil fuels. It will take a united movement to build the confidence of elected representatives to stand up to the big businesses profiting from the status quo and not just use empty words to placate and dismiss everyone's concerns. The people in this province are paying attention, and this is the time for action like never before. We have a real opportunity to affect change in this province, but only if we put decent work in the centre of our strategy and commit to leaving no one behind. When candidates ask for your vote, tell them you'll be voting for candidates who understand that climate justice, racial justice, and decent work are fundamental and inseparable. Thank you.
Thank you, Dina. We'd like to leave you finally on a note of hope and inspiration as momentum builds around our campaign with the words of Dr. David Suzuki and Severin Cullis-Suzuki, who is Executive Director of the David Suzuki Foundation. So if you can play the video.
We're in a state of escalating global climate emergency. The Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change has declared a code red for humanity. Our window of time to act is rapidly closing.
But all the solutions we need to prevail exist right now. Our governments just aren't implementing them fast enough. Our only way to ensure a livable future is through urgent climate action, massively and collectively driven at every level of our societies and governments.
In Ontario, the Ontario Climate Emergency Campaign seeks exactly this transformation. This growing non-partisan movement brings together Ontarians from every walk of life and every corner of the province to recognize all that is threatened. Everything we love and cherish, our health, our very way of life.
This campaign connects the collective power of all of our voices to urge government to take climate action required of this moment. Let's vote for real, coherent climate policy. Let's hold our elected officials accountable to implementing the critical evidence-based climate solutions that we need. Let's accept nothing less from government because there has never been more at stake. Because if the climate fails, every injustice will be amplified.
Join the Ontario Climate Emergency Campaign now and ask those you know to become part of an unstoppable force for change.
This is our opportunity to come together to secure a safe, healthy, and just future for ourselves, our children, and generations to come.
Thank you.